I'm Elizabeth, standing in the opulent private dining room of one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants. I'm face to face with my mother, Helen, and brother, Jake. They look haggard. Mom is frail, her head covered by a headscarf due to cancer treatments, and Jake has aged poorly, his once athletic build now soft. 5 years ago, they cast me out. I remember that Christmas Eve like it was yesterday. I was at the door of my childhood home, tears streaming down my face as Jake spat. "No one wants you here." And Mom just nodded silently beside him. But now, here they are, sitting across from me, after I've built a multi-million-dollar company. I grew up in a small town in Oregon. My parents, Helen and David, owned a cozy bookstore. Dad was a gentle soul, always lost in the world of books. He spent hours curating the collection, making our bookstore a local gem. Mom was a bit more practical, handling the finances and day-to-day operations. Jake, for years older than me, was my protector in my early years. I was a bookworm from a young age. I devoured every book in the store, and my teachers often praised my writing and analytical skills. Mom and Dad were so proud. They display my essays on the counter of the bookstore for customers to see. On my 12th birthday, Dad closed the store early to take me to a fancy dinner at the only upscale restaurant in town. But things changed when I turned 16. Jake was struggling in college, constantly changing majors and barely passing his classes. Meanwhile, I was getting acceptance letters from top universities. Jake's jealousy started to show. He'd make snide remarks at the dinner table, and Mom would always side with him, saying, "College isn't for everyone, Elizabeth. Jake has other talents." I discovered my love for software development during my junior year of high school. A local tech event introduced me to coding, and I was immediately hooked. I spent all my free time learning and even developed a simple app to manage the bookstore's inventory. Dad was overjoyed, but Jake was resentful. When I got into Harvard with a full scholarship, the whole family celebrated. Dad hugged me tightly and said, "You're going to change the world, Liz." But as my departure date neared, tensions flared. Jake dropped out of college and decided to take over the bookstore. Dad supported his decision, but also encouraged me to pursue my dreams. Mom, however, became overly protective of Jake and started to see me as the one who was leaving them behind. My freshman year at Harvard was amazing. I made great friends, excelled in my classes, and even joined a startup club. Then the call came. Dad had a severe heart attack while at the bookstore. I wanted to go home, but Mom insisted that I stay. "Your father would want you to finish your education," she said. I went home during my mid-term break. The bookstore was in chaos. There were overdue bills everywhere, and the inventory was a mess. When I offered to help, Jake exploded. "I don't need your Ivy League advice," he shouted. Mom quickly defended him, and I felt like an outsider in my own home. That summer, I got an internship offer from a big tech company in Silicon Valley. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but when I told the family, Jake was furious. "You're just going to abandon us again," he said. Mom also tried to guilt-trip me, saying that Dad needed stability. But Dad, in his weak state, told me to take the internship. "Don't let our problems hold you back, Liz," he whispered. The internship was a game changer. I learned so much and made valuable connections. But back home, things were getting worse. Mom's calls became less frequent, and Jake never called at all. During winter break, I flew home full of hope. But what I found was a family on the verge of collapse. The bookstore was on the brink of closing, and Dad's health was deteriorating. When I offered to use my savings to help, Jake and Mom rejected me. "We don't need your charity," Jake sneered. On Christmas Eve, the final blow came. Jake shouted, "No one wants you here," and Mom just stood there, silent. I left that night, with nowhere to go. I called my college roommate, Sarah, and her family took me in. A few days later, Dad passed away. I attended his funeral like a stranger. Mom and Jake ignored me, and I felt completely alone. After Dad's death, I was in a dark place. But I found solace in coding. A professor at Harvard noticed my potential and encouraged me to apply for a startup accelerator program. With new determination, I worked day and night. I took on multiple jobs to support myself and developed an app that used AI to provide personalized book recommendations. The app was a hit. I got my first investment, and my company started to grow. Years passed, and I became a successful entrepreneur. My company was valued at over $100 million. Then, after a Forbes article about me was published, Jake started sending me emails. At first, I ignored them. I hired a private investigator to look into their situation. I found out that the bookstore had closed, Jake was working a minimum wage job, and Mom had been diagnosed with cancer. Despite everything, I anonymously set up a medical fund for Mom. But Jake's requests for money and business opportunities became more frequent and desperate. He even created a false social media post claiming he'd supported my career. My friends from Harvard exposed his lies, but it left me feeling empty. Then, Mom left a voicemail. She was crying, thanking me for the treatment and apologizing. It was the first crack in the wall between us. Today, sitting here in the restaurant, Jake starts talking about his new business idea, a digital book rental service. He wants me to invest $500,000. I set down my glass and say, before we talk about business, we need to address what happened 5 years ago. Jake looks confused, but Mom starts to cry. I pour out my heart, telling them how their words have haunted me for years. I tell them about the sleepless nights, the therapy, and the pain. Jake gets angry, shouting that I abandoned them. But Mom finally admits, we were wrong. I let my fear and grief cloud my judgment. I tell them that I've been paying for Mom's treatments. They're shocked. I say that I don't hate them, but I don't trust them. I offer Jake a job at my Seattle office, entry level, and I'll continue to cover Mom's medical expenses. I also set conditions. They must attend therapy, and Jake must take down all false social media posts. Mom says she'll do anything. Jake nods reluctantly. As they leave in a taxi, I stand alone, breathing deeply. The confrontation I've dreaded for years is over. I've faced my past with dignity, and I know Dad would be proud. 6 months later, we're in family therapy. There's been progress. Jake is doing well at the company, and Mom's health is improving. We're learning to relate as adults, and I'm slowly starting to rebuild this broken family on my own terms. If you've ever faced rejection from your family, I hope my story shows you that you can overcome it and build a life where you're valued and loved.